Buenos días. El Departamento Administrativo Nacional de Estadística, DANE, el Fondo de Población de las Naciones Unidas, UNFPA, y el Leverhulme Center for Demographic Science de la Universidad de Oxford les dan la bienvenida a este taller sobre técnicas y fuentes de datos innovadores, modelamiento estadístico de la población para apoyar los censos. Para la instalación de este taller nos acompaña el subdirector del DANE, Leonardo Trujillo Oyola, la representante auxiliar y oficial encargada de UNFPA Colombia, Marta Lucía Rubio, el analista de programas en población y desarrollo y cooperación sur-sur en UNFPA Brasil y representante de UNFPA Lacro, Pedro Pineiro, y Douglas Leasure, investigador senior y científico de datos del Leverhulme Center for Demographic Science de la Universidad de Oxford, junto a Edith Darin, candidata a doctorado del mismo instituto. Nuevamente les damos la bienvenida, les agradecemos por acompañarnos y sin más preámbulo, invito entonces al subdirector del DANE, Leonardo Trujillo Oyola.
Bueno, buenos días a todos. Bienvenidos a este curso Statistical Population Modeling for Census Support. Primero que todo, me gustaría brindar un cordial saludo a Marta Lucía Rubio, representante adjunta de UNFPA, a Pedro Piñeiro, representante de la UNFPA Brasil y UNFPA Lacro, a Douglas Leasure, investigador senior del Leverhulme Center for Demographic Science de la Universidad de Oxford, a Edith Darin, candidata a doctorado de ese mismo centro de investigación, a nuestros colegas de las oficinas de estadística de Brasil, Costa Rica y Ecuador, a nuestros colegas de ALAP que nos acompañan virtualmente y a todos los presentes, tanto presencial como virtualmente. Hoy el DANE les da la bienvenida al curso Modelamiento Estadístico de la Población para apoyar los censos. En este curso van a conocer que las imágenes satélite nos brindan la oportunidad de tener una fotografía instantánea de la superficie edificada, la cual se relaciona directamente con el número de habitantes. Por lo tanto, esta es una herramienta muy poderosa para todo el tema de estimar la población en áreas pequeñas, lo cual a su vez se permite mejorar el diseño y la planeación de las políticas públicas a nivel local. Es importante recordar que el número de personas es el denominador de la mayoría de los indicadores de pobreza, salud, educación y acceso a servicios públicos, entre otros que utilizamos a diario para medir nuestras metas. Van a conocer aquí también de muchas técnicas bayesianas que nos van a presentar los investigadores, van a manejar software como R, STAN y algunos sistemas de información geográfica. Nosotros como DANE tuvimos la oportunidad de aplicar esta metodología por primera vez en 2019, cuando se estimó la omisión censal en áreas de difícil acceso de la Amazonía, de la Orinoquía y de la región pacífica. En esa oportunidad combinamos las imágenes de satélite con la información recolectada en talleres de cartografía social que se realizaron en 2014 para el Censo Nacional Agropecuario y se actualizaron para el Censo Nacional de Población y Vivienda en 2018. Adicionalmente, con el fin de considerar la incertidumbre propia de los datos, desarrollamos modelos bayesianos jerárquicos para estimar el número de edificaciones y el tamaño de la población en estas áreas. Este trabajo afianzó la relación del DANE con el grupo de investigación WorldPop de la Universidad de Southampton y el Leverhulme Center for Demographic Science de la Universidad de Oxford, a partir de lo cual nos llevó a una firma de un acuerdo de colaboración en 2022 entre las tres partes, con el objetivo de avanzar en el desarrollo de métodos para estimar la población a diferentes niveles de desagregación y considerando características demográficas. Durante este proceso, el DANE adquirió experiencia sobre los métodos efectivos que deben aplicarse para la construcción de alianzas con la academia, como también sobre las nuevas formas de incentivar la investigación e innovación de la entidad. Ahora, gracias a la iniciativa del investigador de la Universidad de Oxford, Douglas Leasure, y UNFPA, el DANE tiene la oportunidad y la fortuna de ser el anfitrión de este curso, en el que participan nuestros colegas nacionales de Ecuador, Brasil y Costa Rica, quienes nuevamente doy la bienvenida y agradezco su presencia para nosotros. Es un honor tenerlos a todos ustedes en el DANE, y esperamos que la estadía para nuestros visitantes en Bogotá siga siendo placentera, tengan tiempo de conocer nuestra ciudad, y para todos los participantes en workshop muy productivo. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, subdirector. A continuación invito entonces a Marta Lucía Rubio, representante auxiliar y oficial encargada de UNFPA Colombia.
Gracias, buenos días a todas, a todos, un gusto estar aquí, muy contenta de poder hacer parte de la instalación de este importante taller. Un saludo especial al subdirector Leonardo Trujillo, a nuestro colega Pedro de UNFPA Brasil, a Douglas Leasure y a Edith de su equipo por estar aquí facilitando estos 3 días, este espacio, a los colegas que están aquí presentes de Colombia, obviamente, de Ecuador, de Costa Rica y de Brasil, que van a ser parte de este importante espacio. La Oficina de País de Colombia del UNFPA pues quiere expresar un agradecimiento al DANE, a la Universidad de Oxford, a Douglas y a su equipo por la posibilidad de desarrollar este importante espacio de trabajo. El desafío de los censos en el país ha dado una serie de lecciones aprendidas. Ya el subdirector nos mencionaba del ejercicio que pudo acompañar en el año 2019 el UNFPA, en los desafíos que tuvimos con las poblaciones dispersas en el país, y creo que en eso Colombia tiene unas excelentes lecciones aprendidas. También queremos reconocer el apoyo de nuestra oficina regional del ACRO, en cabeza de Sabrina Jurán, que no está acá, pero quien nos ha ayudado a impulsar estas iniciativas. Ella es nuestra asesora regional de población y desarrollo. También estamos agradeciendo, obviamente, al equipo del Center for Demographic Science de la Universidad de Oxford por regresar a Colombia. Este es su segundo momento para continuar con el ejercicio de capacidades del DANI y también de los demás países que están presentes en este espacio. Los censos nacionales de población y vivienda, generalmente realizados una vez por década, brindan información crítica sobre la demografía nacional que se necesita para brindar servicios sociales efectivos y, como lo decía el subdirector, son el denominador para todas las estimaciones y las definiciones importantes en materia de política pública, lo cual incluye asignaciones presupuestales. Sin embargo, muchos países no pueden lograr un censo nacional de cobertura completa, y uno de los casos es Colombia, sobre todo en regiones remotas y en áreas de conflicto, excluyendo algunos grupos que son los grupos más vulnerables de la población. Y eso, digamos, ahí ya pone un gran desafío a la política pública. Incluso cuando un censo logra una cobertura total, los datos de población pueden volverse obsoletos rápidamente debido a la migración interna, que puede ser difícil de cuantificar. Los datos demográficos subnacionales y desglosados son una herramienta fundamental para diversas aplicaciones humanitarias y desarrollo, incluida la prestación y la planificación de servicios, la planificación electoral y procesos de preparación y respuesta a desastres y a toda la respuesta humanitaria. La pandemia del COVID ha agravado la disponibilidad de datos de población precisos y oportunos, ya que se ha retrasado significativamente el progreso en la ronda del censo 2020. Y eso, pues, nosotros somos un poco, en Colombia hemos visto esta situación. La creciente necesidad de datos de población desglosados espacialmente para la formulación de políticas basadas en pruebas y la ejecución de programas dirigidos ha desencadenado la exploración de nuevas fuentes de datos a diferentes escalas geográficas. Y estamos hablando de los datos en espacios pequeños, como son nuestros espacios dispersos en mucha parte del territorio colombiano. Los avances en la disponibilidad de imágenes satelitales detalladas, herramientas de geoposicionamiento para encuestas de campo, métodos estadísticos y poder computacional están permitiendo el desarrollo y la aplicación de enfoques que pueden estimar distribuciones de población en escalas espaciales finas en países enteros. Aprovechando estas innovaciones, junto con nuestros socios, trabajamos para producir estimaciones de población de alta resolución. Sin reemplazar las fuentes tradicionales de datos demográficos y socioeconómicos, las estimaciones de población pueden llenar importantes lagunas de datos e informar la toma de decisiones en casos en que no se pueda realizar el censo de población y vivienda, respaldar los preparativos del censo y garantizar la calidad cuando se planifique una nueva enumeración o generar actualizaciones intercensales de áreas pequeñas. Incluso en situaciones en las que es necesario distribuir la omisión del censo o estimaciones de población en áreas no cubiertas, hemos visto el valor de las estimaciones modeladas, que ya el subdirector nos contaba. UNFPA apoya a las oficinas nacionales de estadística y a otras partes interesadas relevantes en el desarrollo conjunto de estimaciones de población modeladas y el fortalecimiento de capacidades para que esto sea posible aplicar. En el marco de la experiencia aplicada con el DANE para las estimaciones en zonas rurales dispersas para el cierre del censo desde 2018, fue muy importante a partir de los ejercicios, que era lo que nos estaba comentando el subdirector, de capacidades generados con la universidad y conocimiento que ha sido compartido con nuestras colegas de la oficina de Brasil. En este taller, en Colombia, se espera escalar este proceso a otros países, a quienes se les brindará una descripción general de cómo se pueden utilizar las aplicaciones de modelado de población para llenar los vacíos de datos demográficos en una variedad de entornos y responder a estas necesidades y desafíos de áreas pequeñas. Muchísimas gracias y esperamos que sea un éxito y un espacio de intercambio y fortalecimiento de capacidades para todas y todos los equipos de los países que están presentes.
A usted, representante, muchas gracias. A continuación invito a Pedro Piñeiro, analista de programas en población y desarrollo y cooperación sur-sur en UNFPA Brasil y representante de UNFPA Lacro.
Gracias. Hello, everyone. Good morning for those here present and for those watching us in YouTube. The Regional Office for Latin America and Caribbean for the United Nations Population Fund would like to express its gratitude to our partners, the National Administrative Department of Statistics of Colombia, Darin, and the Leverhulme Center for Demographic Science at the University of Oxford, which allow us to have this space for learning and exchange experiences. UNFPA is also excited about Latin America Population Association, ALAP, participation in the workshop and the dissemination of the material through their channels. Important pledge of leaving no one behind and reaching the furthest behind has defined development and the humanitarian effort since 2015. Leaving no one behind is the central transformative premise of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its Sustainable Development Goals. Those being left behind tend to be discriminated against due to different identities and factors. In many cases, there are overlaps with multiple and intersecting forms of discriminating, making inequalities worse. Geographic location is one of many factors placing people at risk of being left behind. Contemporary and especially detailed population distribution data sets are critical for properly informing and supporting environmental, health, and development applications at local, subnational, national, and regional level, including humanitarian preparedness, adaptation, and response. Yet, often population data at the lowest administrative level are not geographically granular enough for target planning and localized response. Given the importance of geographic location as a factor within the efforts to leave no one behind, the Regional Office for Latin America and Caribbean of the United States Population Fund is honored to partner with Leverhulme Center for Demographic Science and National Administrative Department of Statistics of Colombia to work together to address this challenge and to support countries produce high-resolution model population data sets. Since 2015, UNFPA has been working together with partners. It's also important to mention our partner WorldPop at the University of Southampton to provide technical support to national statistics offices to strengthen capacity for production of high-resolution gridded population estimates. In 2021, we created the hub, the Modelos de Población, where we come together with National Statistics Office from Brazil, Ecuador, Colombia, and Haiti. This started with the involvement of Colombia in the workshop tailored to Brazil. Dani's participation was highly recognized and appreciated. And then in 2022, in Brazil, we built the momentum to create a platform for further knowledge and experience exchange between NSOs. Working together as a group allowed us to maximize investments at national level for regional benefit. In June in 2022, the first meeting of the Hub NSO LACRO took place with participation of NSOs and UNFPA country offices and those countries that received technical assistance. Since then, we've had met once a month, and these meetings have become an important space for knowledge sharing and problem solving, as we are tapping in each other's experience to apply solutions developed in one country to similar challenges in another. When Haiti requested time-sensitive support, the Hub allowed the quick formation of a team providing technical assistance to support Haiti and NSO with population estimates. It also created space for peer-to-peer direct technical assistance with NSO Colombia and NSO Ecuador directly in their application of population models to estimate census omission. We see this workshop as an opportunity to further strengthen our engagement with you and to bring experience in modeling the region closer to others with interest to apply. At UNFPA, we will continue to be working together with our partners who want to join this firm commitment to create better and more timely data and evidence to fulfill the promise that we plan to leave no one behind. This is an opportunity to share lessons learned, forge new partnerships, and signal new commitments to bring the promise of Cairo and Montevideo to everyone, leaving no one behind. Thank you. Good morning.
A usted, representante, muchas gracias. A continuación vamos a escuchar a Douglas Leasure, investigador senior y científico de datos del Leverhulme Center for Demographic Science de la Universidad de Oxford.
Buenos días. Welcome to you all. Thank you very much for joining us today and throughout the week. And welcome to everybody joining us online to participate in the workshop. It's my pleasure to be here representing the Leverhulme Center for Demographic Science at the University of Oxford. And just want to extend our thanks to Dane for hosting us here, making it possible for all of us to come together for knowledge exchange, and our partners at UNFPA, both in Colombia, Brazil, and the Latin American and Caribbean Regional Office, for coordinating all of us, bringing us together to make this type of workshop and knowledge exchange activity possible. This partnership began several years ago before the pandemic in 2019, when we conducted a small workshop, 2019, in this room, in the neighboring room, speaking with Dane directly about Colombia's goals of estimating populations that are difficult for the census to reach. As everyone has highlighted, it's often the most vulnerable parts of the population who are the most difficult to incorporate into official statistics, and representing these segments of the population well is our goal here today, to talk about methods that can use non-traditional types of data like satellite remote sensing, other geospatial data, and combine that with traditional data sources from the census, from surveys, from registries, to allow us to quantify these parts of the population that are often not well represented in official statistics. So today, it's really great to see representation from a variety of countries, from the Latin American Population Association, so that we can get a broader perspective on challenges, data that are available to meet these challenges, and to try to develop together statistical methods that can produce robust population estimates in difficult to access areas. And the focus today will be on Bayesian statistics. And the reason we're focused on Bayesian statistics is because this provides a very flexible statistical framework for analyzing different types of data and bringing different types of data together to produce population estimates and estimating uncertainty in those population estimates. And we see this as a key part of the challenge. If we're using new types of data that are not direct census observations, enumerations, we want to empower all of you to develop your own bespoke statistical models and to incorporate estimates of uncertainty so that we can gain trust in the statistics that we're producing and estimate populations at high spatial resolution where it might otherwise be difficult to incorporate these parts of the population into official statistics. So the workshop will be led by Edith Darin, who is a PhD student from the University of Oxford, who has significant experience leading similar workshops like this one, and years of experience developing Bayesian statistical methods for population estimation using geospatial data. So now I would pass it off to Edith to introduce herself and the workshop. Thank you all for being here.
It's fine. Challenges that you can meet with this kind of model, but we're going to discuss all of that today. So today, just to present it for today, it's more like a group discussion where I'm going to start with like showing what is the model, why, like which kind of input we need or can be leveraged to this kind of model, why Bayesian statistics. And then throughout the day, there's going to be different presentation of population models. So I think we're going to, then it's Colombia that's going to, is it you, Lina, that's going to present? By the way, like here you have agendas if you want to look at it more in details. And so, yeah. I'm going to start, then we will have an overview of the situation of population model across Latin American country that is going to be presented by Pedro. Then you will have like Lina that's here, that's going to present more about the population model in Colombia that has been developed in 2019. Then Caio, that is over there in the room, is going to present the work that they've done in Brazil. And I'm going to take this opportunity to ask, is Michael here from the population, from the model for Haiti? So he might join us this afternoon. And maybe such that we have an idea about who is in the room, can we have a brief introduction of where are you coming from and which institution you're coming from? And maybe I'm going to start with you and I'm going to repeat it on the mic. Or maybe I'm going to use the mic itself, actually. Yeah.
Hola, buen día. Mi nombre es Dayana Tipán. Yo trabajo en el INEC de Ecuador. Soy demógrafa y bueno, en este caso estoy trabajando en el tema de las proyecciones poblacionales, ya que estamos terminando nuestro censo de población y vivienda y comunidades en Ecuador. Así que muchas gracias por la invitación y pues espero que podamos seguir compartiendo el conocimiento.
Hello, buen día, mi nombre es Cristian Garcés, igual de Ecuador. Trabajo en el Instituto de Estadística de mi país y hemos venido del equipo de proyección y del equipo de procesamiento del censo. Estamos por finalizar nuestro censo y como saben, un paso siguiente es justamente la estimación de la omisión censal. Es por eso que estamos muy interesados en este tema. Muchas gracias por la invitación.
Buenos días con todos. Mi nombre es Ajechi Luisa. De igual manera trabajo en el Instituto Nacional de Estadísticas y Censos de Ecuador. Soy el responsable del área de procesamiento de datos, como bien lo dijo mi compañero, específicamente en lo que refiere a los registros administrativos. Hemos venido acá a este taller justamente con el objetivo de adquirir más conocimiento respecto a lo que es el censo e incluso conocer sus experiencias de cómo utilizaron los registros administrativos, digamos, en los censos. Eso de mi parte, muchas gracias.
Muy buenos días para todos. Mi nombre es Gustavo García. Trabajo aquí en el DANE, en el área de investigación y desarrollo, específicamente con datos geográficos. Vengo en compañía de un gran equipo de profesionales. Personalmente participé en el ejercicio de omisión censal que se mencionó anteriormente en el 2019. Tuvimos la oportunidad de calcular esa omisión a partir de modelos bayesianos y datos georreferenciados que proporcionamos desde la Dirección de Geoestadística, que es la dirección donde yo trabajo, y pues muy contento de estar aquí compartiendo experiencias, adquiriendo conocimiento y para lo que necesiten, con mucho gusto. Muchas gracias.
Good morning, buenos días. My name is Vanessa Carrera. I am a Population and Development Technical Analyst in UNFPA Ecuador. So I'm here with the team of the National Statistics Office. I would also like to say that there are more than 20 people that are connected online for this workshop. So if all the people from the National Statistics Office in Ecuador, if they have some connection issues or something that they want to share, they can also send a message to me, so I can tell to you. Eso en Spanish. Para la gente que está conectada del INEC de Ecuador, Vanessa Carrera, analista técnica de población y desarrollo. Cualquier consulta que tengan, cualquier duda que ustedes quieran transmitir acá a la sala, también me pueden transmitir a mí personalmente. Tiene Margarita Sosa mi contacto, entonces me transmiten, por favor, voy a estar muy pendiente. Thank you so much.
On that note, is it like on the YouTube? Is there a chat open? I don't know. Can you say it in Spanish?
Disculpa, ¿hay algún chat abierto en YouTube para que puedan transmitir sus consultas?
Sí, está habilitado.
Y en el webinar de Zoom también.
En este momento Zoom no está funcionando.
Solamente el YouTube.
O sea, de la parte de YouTube no lo vemos.
Entonces, bueno, podemos decir, si es que alguien tiene consultas, por favor, en el chat de YouTube. If anyone have questions, you can write them in the YouTube chat. Por favor. Muchas gracias.
Hola, buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es Karen Córdoba, yo soy estadística, hago parte del grupo de investigación y desarrollo de la Dirección de Censos y Demografía de aquí del DANE. El año pasado tuve la oportunidad pues, de participar en este proyecto y hemos estado trabajando pues, en conjunto con Douglas y con el equipo en este tema del desarrollo de modelos. Igualmente, pues, muy feliz de estar acá y de pues, tener esa oportunidad de seguir compartiendo pues todo este tema de investigación que es muy importante para el equipo.
Hola, mi nombre es Juan Camilo Trillos. Pues nada, yo apoyo aquí el grupo de proyecciones de población del Departamento Administrativo Nacional de Estadística. Actualmente estamos colaborando con un tema de migración y pues nada, la idea es aportar y pues aprender un poco de esta actividad. Muchas gracias.
Hola, muy buenos días. Mi nombre es César Cristancho, soy demógrafo, trabajo con el equipo de proyecciones del DANE y la idea también es ver un poco cómo trabajar a nivel subnacional, buscar alternativas metodológicas para sacar proyecciones subnacionales. Gracias.
Bueno, buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es Rebeca Gamboa, yo vengo del INEC en Costa Rica. Trabajo en específico en la unidad de estadísticas demográficas. Bueno, estoy a cargo de dos proyectos. Uno son las estimaciones y proyecciones de población y otra la creación de un registro único de población a través de registros administrativos. También estoy apoyando en lo que es en el censo, en la omisión censal. Estamos calculando esa omisión a través de las estimaciones y proyecciones de población y también a través de registros administrativos, pero todavía no hemos incursionado en lo que es por medio de modelos bayesianos. Es precisamente por eso que vengo acá, para aprender esta nueva alternativa, y pues un gusto a todos y un placer estar aquí en este taller.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Carlos Alberto Durán, yo soy el coordinador del Grupo de Investigación y Desarrollo de la Dirección de Geostadística y para nosotros es muy importante aprender ese tipo de modelado, sobre todo que busquen integrar la información geostadística y estadística para hacer modelados y estimaciones de variables a niveles de mayor desagregación. Muchas gracias.
So, buenos dias. Good morning, everyone. I'm Caio Gonçalves. I'm from Brazil. I'm working as a consultor in the GradPop project. It's the projects that are modeling population for small areas in Brazil. I have been working in this project since the beginning there in Brazil. So, as Edith said, we have this experience. And today we want to share here what the lessons that we have. So, yeah, it's a pleasure to be here to sharing this with everyone.
Buenos días a todos, mi nombre es Lina María Sánchez. Estoy encargada de coordinar la investigación a nivel del DANE. También ya participé en un proyecto con Douglas, que fue estimar la omisión censal en rutas, que fue algo que tanto el subdirector como Douglas hablaron un poco, también Edith. Y también estuve en Brasil participando con Caio en el curso que dio Edith en ese momento. Entonces, bienvenidos a Colombia y espero que saquen provecho de este curso.
So, thanks a lot to everyone. Have you seen, like, it's fine if you speak Spanish. We're going to deal with that. It's not a problem if you have questions and you ask them in Spanish. I'm not good enough to do the presentation in Spanish, but at least like don't hesitate to interrupt and speak, and we're gonna manage that all together. So what I suggest, we're gonna start with the presentation about the global framework, and then I'm thinking that we're gonna have a break. Depending on the time, it might be already lunch or just a coffee break, we'll see. So, okay, it's fine. So I want to kind of start from when so mainly we see that there's a different area of interest together, because I heard that you mentioned also administrative data, like creating population estimation from administrative data, and census submission. Those are topics that are also very interesting and that we're working on with Dane. And this could be a focus in like separate conversation that we're gonna have during the week. But the main presentation are gonna be focused really on leveraging satellite images for population modeling. And how it started with this idea of this researcher Wardrop that did this display of the census data across the world. And you can see that the census, as you all know, happen every 10 years in the best cases. But in some cases, it doesn't even happen every 10 years, and with the worst case always presented being the Democratic Republic of Congo, where we actually worked. We're going to see that later. But this country didn't see a census in 1984. And the idea is that in those situations, you need something else you need to leverage other sources of information that are not the census in order to have population estimates accurate at final level. So she developed the conceptual framework of bottom-up modeling. This bottom-up modeling, what is the idea, and you're going to hear about it a lot, is the idea of you have a sample of places in the country where you know the total population, but those are a sample only. Then you link it through a model with geospatial covariates, and then you can predict for the entire country. So she set up the framework, like this idea of like leveraging little sample across the country to predict population. So I'm going to go through the different model based on this bottom-up approach to actually address different issues. The first issue, the first question that can be tackled with this bottom-up model is repurposing survey data. So the idea is that you have survey data that has been used, that has been collected for household surveys, but then you're reusing it for population modeling. The inventor of that model is over there. So this is the seminal paper. And it was looking at a Nigerian case, because Nigeria, the census is very political between the north and the south, because they are like, yeah, there's political sensitivity over on that. And the idea is that we really needed like a statistical model to not go into the political issues of it. And so we Doug here, Douglas, Doug, you can Douglitas, whatever, you can call him different names, but he is really like the brain behind the model that we're gonna discuss. And by the way, this workshop is really about the statistical framework and the data framework. The model itself, we're going to see if it might not directly fit your purposes, because you're going to have specific data. You're going to have specific data, talking on the online people as well. But what we really want to transfer during this week is the concept, the process, and the statistics, but then the idea would be to tweak it with your own data and with your own like issues, because yeah, we know that every country has their own data, and you might need to develop sub-models to tackle the challenges. But this is the main framework, and that has been applied in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 2020-22, and in South Sudan, where they had a lot of problems with like displacement. Don't know if you're aware about the history of South Sudan, but there was a census before the partition of the country, then there was the partition of the country and a lot of movement. And it's a very, so those two contexts are the extreme cases of data scarcity, where like the challenges confronted by the National Statistical Office are really complicated to get accurate population number. So this is, I called it intercensal count. It's even like when there's no census, like census is not possible and you need something else to produce population number. Then we have two cases where they use the bottom-up model for census preparation. And so this is, one is Zambia in 2021, and the other one, Caio, I said that it's census preparation. I think you're going to discuss more about what, in which context Brazil or IBGE wanted to kind of study this model. So this, I keep it for Caio this afternoon. There is a second context where the bottom-up model was interesting, is to fill census gap. So this is Burkina Faso case, typically. Burkina Faso case is that it's in 2020. They basically they surveyed they have big insecurity challenges, and so the census team couldn't cover the area that are like in outline like that, and so we, in that case, that's the work that I've been leading. We used a similar approach to estimate the population in the places that the census couldn't reach. And this is also a similar project as in Colombia, and that's Lina that's going to talk about it this afternoon. I just wanted to highlight here that we are researchers, and I'm doing so. I will start my PhD, and I'm going to talk about it later. But this is like very applied research, and we worked a lot. All the people that have been mentioned throughout the presentation, we worked a lot with National Statistical Office, and we see this is the really interesting. I think for me, this week is excellent because you're going to bring the challenges that you have. We're going to bring the knowledge that we have in other contexts. And out of this discussion, we'll see how we can improve this model, how we can make it better such that it can fit different situations. So quickly, maybe I wanted to just emphasize that I've been working in this field for the past, Doug and I, we actually started almost together working on that idea in 5 years ago. And I'll start my PhD in September, really making this context, this model better. So yeah, it's a work in progress. So it's not a definite model that we're going to just like transmit. The idea is really to discuss, to see how we can make it better together. So the general the logic of the model is, so I quickly presented it, the fact that you have just a sample, but where you know the population and you model it with geospatial covariates and then you predict. Here, it's prediction at the grid cell level, so as a grid. By the way, so who in this room has the knowledge on geostatistics or worked with GIS? Okay. Who worked with Bayesian statistics? Okay, no, okay. You worked with, sweet. Okay. I mean, you didn't. Come on. Okay, so really, And it's quite interesting when we're working with Darin. Typically, like it's talking with like different departments that normally don't work together. The geostatistics, because they provide the covariates, and the more demographic people, because they build the model. So it's really like this kind of conversation between the two departments in the stats office. So, I mean, it's interesting. And I'm going to go through quickly through the input data. Tomorrow, I'm going to lay out the plan for the week. So today, overview of different models, different contexts. Tomorrow, we'll discuss about input data. And the idea is that there are three main input data: population, settlement, and other geospatial data. The way we set up the day tomorrow is that we're going to present data that has been used, and then the idea is to open the floor for us in the room for you to talk about your own data. So the population data that you might want to use, the settlement data that you have, or the geospatial data that can be interesting for population model. So it's going to be tomorrow more of a presentation discussion type. Wednesday and Thursday is going to be more hands-on model building, working with the software. And Friday is going to be a wrap-up. We're going to start with a seminar given by Doug here for the 7th anniversary of Darin. So here we're going to speak mainly about settlement data. It's going to open the floor to other kind of data that can be used for modeling population. And we're going to discuss, like, Friday is more about like how can we make it, what are the next stage of the collaboration. So start with population data. What has been used is, so as I said, partial censuses, which like you cover part of the country, but you can't cover the entire country. Microcensus, which is the fact that you do a survey, especially for population enumeration. So you go on the ground and has a household survey, but you just count the people. And that's what has been used in the Democratic Republic of Congo and in South Sudan. The idea is that the census was not feasible for a lot of reasons, too much resources. So we did what we call the microcensus. And then you can also repurpose survey household listing, because when you do household surveys, I mean, it might be differ across like the institution that you are in, but in sub-Saharan Africa, they pick the cluster and then they enumerate the population, and then that's the two-stage, then they pick the household that they're going to do the survey. And our take is that you can use this pre-enumeration to do population modeling. And you can do it so the idea is really to have a well-defined geographical area. So you exactly know what are the boundaries. And that's interesting because when you talk about the survey people, often they're not familiar with the geospatial data. And so you have to go to the geostatistics to ask for the cluster boundaries. But so again, this bridging between geospatial and survey departments. So, and so as you see, you survey everyone in the cluster, and then you get a total population. Then the idea is to combine it with a settlement layer. The settlement layer is often, or currently okay, whatever. So the settlement layer, those are remote sensing product. So you have satellite imagery, and you do feature extraction to get the delineation of the building. And so it looks like that, mainly. And there is different provider. So here, we're not going to learn how to extract those information from the remote sensing or satellite imagery. We're going to work with institutions that already did the work of extracting the building footprint, or we'll see tomorrow more details about it. Then, and you combine it with other geospatial covariates. And here are some examples. The geospatial covariates, the idea is to see what are the variation of population density. And you can already think about the fact that if you're close to a road, there's going to be more people. If you are close to a urban center, there's going to be more people. So it's this kind of covariates that have like an impact or like an influence of the distribution of people across an area. And so it didn't work in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but we can think about this one is interesting, typically like the future, because from remote sensing, you can go like, you can also like detect fossil fuel. So like everything that is related with the presence of humans in the area. And the really important thing is that we have that across the entire area. So settlement and geospatial covariate are available for the entire area you want to estimate the population for, but the population data, you have it only on several samples. And what is the logic? So here is, I'm going to go really like the logic with the hands and then swiftly go softly into the statistics. So the global logic is you have two clusters. You do know the population because you have them, you have surveyed them on the ground. You have a cluster here that has few people, 500 people, here 100 people. And the covariates that you have is settlement density. Low settlement density, high settlement density. You relate together, you model them together, and so you can see a relationship between settlement density and population sizes. You do some kind of regression that we're going to go together later. And that helps you to, you're modeling a regression. And the idea is then you predict in the unsurveyed areas. So you have the population only for those gray points, but then you want to predict for the white area. You use the regression and you predict. It's really important to have the uncertainty with it because you can understand that you have only a sample and only some covariates. So that is not going to be explained exactly the number of people, but you model it with uncertainty such that then you can predict the population in the white areas by looking at the settlement layer, which gives you the population size. And the idea is to use different covariates, such as settlement density, mean slope, the fact that if it's very like high, you're not going to have a lot of people. If flat, you're going to have more people. Night lights. Night lights is the light at night. So often linked also with the number of people. Distance to urban center. Those are examples. And so you derive the relationship with those covariates. And this is give you the different facets of the human settlement in order to predict in the white area. But I know that you came for something else than just schema because probably you're a statistician and you want to see what is exactly the model. So that was just the overview of the model. Now, let's go more deep in the model. So first, Bayesian framework. Doug touched a bit about it, the fact that it's really important to emphasize the fact that this is a model that needs to incorporate uncertainty because population, like the size of population is very heterogeneous and we're not going to have covariates that are going to explain everything and we're going to have just a sample or we're going to have data issues. And so it's really important to model, to incorporate all the uncertainty. This is not on the slides, is also like mentioned the fact that Bayesian framework, and I don't know why you went for Bayesian framework, but it's this idea of the flexibility of the model. The fact that, oops, maybe there is also this data that is interesting, but this data can't be a covariate, so we might want to use at another stage. And so you can kind of, it's really creative and the design is really nice. Tomorrow, unfortunately, it's at the end of the day, but I will we will see, I'm gonna try to give to you like some insights about the philosophy of the Bayesian approach and the different question that's like, Bayesian in statistics is a bit another angle around probability and what it means in like, in testing hypothesis. I'm not just repeating for the people. And yeah, it's a nice ride. It's complicated at the beginning, but it's an interesting ride as statistician to take. I will share later this. This slide. This is we're gonna go through. So those maybe is for the online people, because the tutorials, those are the one that we developed at the very beginning for Brazil, like during the pandemic, something like that. So we're going to go through it together, but this is not going to be recorded online. So online people, of course, it's a link, so you can't see it, but you can, it's statistical modeling for census support. So exactly the same name as the workshop, and you can find it directly. It's a tutorial. And then other resources for people that want to go more in depth about it. The other thing that I wanted to emphasize on this overview is the hierarchical setting. So the idea of a hierarchical setting is that you take this Nigeria, that's the example here, and here you have the population count at the different sampling area. And you see a lot of heterogeneity, like yellow and red. And a hierarchical framework is the idea that you can actually cluster the observation to what it belongs. So typically the fact that the population distribution is going to be different by state here in that case. In that case here you see Lagos from the sample survey. So Lagos is the economic capital of Nigeria. So you have a bigger, so all the population distribution of the cluster that are in Lagos tend to be higher than in Edo, that is a very rural setting. So then you can go into more detail. The fact that two neighboring, they are called local government area in Nigeria. If they're close, they're more likely to share some similarity in terms of population distribution. So, and even, you can go even further, the fact that in urban setting, the population distribution is going to be different than in a rural setting or in a village. So the model that we're going to describe in the next slide is modeling like fine variation with the geospatial covariates, so the distance to urban center, the night lights. So this is fine variation, but also global variation that are at the stage of groups, such as urban, rural, village, region, sub-region. Okay, so now the model. Once again, this is a model. We're going to see Bayesian statistics from the end of tomorrow and Wednesday, Thursday. This is an example of a model that was really useful in the context of sub-Saharan Africa. In contexts that are richer in data, you might want to go for something else. But we want to go through this modeling process so that it's start the conversation, because this is really made for a setting where you have very few data. So you can't constrain much the estimates. What's the idea? You have a cluster here, and you know the number of people. You know the area, the total area, but you know also the settlement. So in pixels, this is the settlement layer. And this settlement layer is typically telling you that 3.5 hectares are settled. So how do you decompose? You say that this resident, the number of people in this cluster, is actually, you bring in the settled area. So because, and this is really important, the settled area is the thing that's going to allow you to just extrapolate everywhere, because settled area is going to be available for every part of the country. So this, you want basically to model the population density, the number of people per settled area. So therefore, you divide, because this is the guy or the indicator that you have for the entire country. So you decompose the resident count into population density times settled area, with settled area something that you observed from the satellite imagery, and population density something that you're going to model. So first, resident count. This is the number of people. So it follows a Poisson, because this is the distribution to account for the fact that the number of people is a discrete and a count. So the Poisson distribution is the distribution that is made to account for the fact that it's a count. And you say that the number of people is a Poisson around the density of people times the settled area. So density of people. Yeah. You have a question? Okay, cool. Then the question is how to model the population density, because currently, if you just do that, you just have an average number of people per settled area across the entire country. And you can think that the number of people per settled area is going to vary across the country. So typically, if you are, if you are in an urban setting, you might have more people per settled area, or the opposite, because, and that's something that we observed, is that you might have the opposite, because in, and we're going to discuss it later, of course, but in urban area, the settled area might be also shops and industries. So the number of people per settled area can be lower than in a rural area, where the number of people per settled area is higher, because there's mainly, like, every building is actually someone living in it. But that's a little insight. So you want to model this population density, so the number of people per settled area, or the number of people per building. To do that, you take this density, population density, that was on the just before here. You don't consider it as being observed, you consider it as being modeled. You model it with geospatial covariates. So you're saying that the average, so you model it first with a log normal. Why a log normal? And by the way, people that are not familiar with Bayesian statistics is about finding the distribution that you think is the more likely to represent the phenomenon that you're modeling. And here we want to model population density. What do we know about population density? First, it's positive, because you can't go under, you can't have negative population density. So you want a positive distribution. Then you know that it's continuous, because it's not a number, it's a continuous, like you can have 0.5, 0.9, like it's a continuous variable. And so in those cases, log normal are the way to go, because their distribution is positive and continuous. So you model the population density like that, which allows you, and that's really critical, to have a variance term. That's going to account for what is not explained by your covariates and by the settlement area. So you introduce a variance term that you didn't have before, because the Poisson, as you know, is the mean and the variance are the same, so you can't have overdispersion. Thanks to the log normal, you introduce the sigma. And this sigma is going to capture the heterogeneity that you can't explain. So you're saying that the population density of a cluster is drawn from is around a mean and a variance. And the mean, then you're modeling the mean. And the mean is defined by something that you're very familiar, which is the regression, that is alpha plus beta xi. And the xi is going to be the covariates, so that they can model the variation at fine scale. Typically, schools density. So if you have a lot of schools, you're likely to have more people per settled area. Or the the proportion of residential size, that depends on the covariates that you have. But that can inform locally what is the population, the population density. And then comes into play the hierarchical framework that I was explaining, the fact that you're modeling as well the structure, the global variation. The fact that the population density is going to vary if you're in an urban area or in a rural area. So your alpha is going to be random by region or by settlement type. But you can also make it, your sigma vary that. Because typically in rural areas, you can have a sigma that, like, you want to lower down the sigma probably because there's less heterogeneity in rural areas. Whereas in urban areas, there's more heterogeneity. So the variance might be bigger. So you can start to think about how to specify your model to follow what you think the process of human distribution across a country is. And so that's a recap of the model. That's the model we're going to work with. We're going to fit one similar to that. And this is basically the population number that you can observe because you sampled it. You decompose it into density times settled area. Settled area is observed as well. Density, the people per settled area, you model it with a log normal, and the mean of this density is defined by covariates and global variation, urban versus rural, and regional differences. So that's the basic of the model structure. And the idea is that you can add onto this model. And those are just examples of model that we wanted to add or we actually added. And this is typically those orange boxes is where the implementation in a country is going to differ. So typically, weighted precision. Depending on your interest, we can go into that later. The weighted precision is the idea that the survey sometimes are weighted, such that the population input that you're having is biased because the survey targeted population, the area that are more populated. So if you're using that, you're going to have a biased population because you only have a sample that has higher population number. So you want to account for that. Then you want to incorporate some people imputation. If in the survey you know that you did have total count, so you want to model also the imputation. Then you can, how do you select the covariates? You can do model-based variable selection, and I think that Kayo might talk about it, how they did model-based variable selection. We also, in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, as you've seen, there's very few data. So we wanted to also derive age and sex estimates from the samples. So we developed a submodel, or Jean-Luc Abou developed a submodel for that purpose. And then you can actually open the box of the settled area and say that actually the remote sensing is not correct, or not correct, has some flaws, and you want to model the imprecision of the satellite imagery. So you can model the error, or you can also, and that's very interesting, but we haven't yet incorporated, try to find data that inform you about the building type, and typically try to model residential versus non-residential and incorporate it in the model. So all this way to like have a better picture. And that's why we want to teach you the Bayesian point of view, because Bayesian is not like take your model and that's it. It's about like building subgroups that can tackle the specific issues that you have in your data. And a question that we, for now, haven't answered so much is the migration, how you take into account like big displacement. And yeah, so as I said at the beginning, it's really a work in progress. And with this little toy that we're gonna show you and we are gonna play with together, like a lot of research or like improvement needs to be added in order to have a better picture and in order to leverage the little, like in order to have population counts regularly with sample data and using satellite imagery. So more details is the tutorial that I was talking about. And we're gonna see together, we're gonna go through this together. I just wanted to mention something is that with Dane, we're currently in a research collaboration. So the idea is the model that I've shown you, we can validate it internally by predicting in the cluster that we know the population for, but we never validate it against a global population. And that's what we're going to try with Dane, is going to take this model that we explained to you and try it with Dane, and that's the Census 2018 from Dane. And in that research collaboration, the idea is that we're going to look at different sampling of the cluster to see what is the impact of the total number that you find from the model, to see which kind of submodel you need to add for accounting the different sampling design. So that's the end of the overview. I'm not sure what time it is. Oh, I have the UK time, so I don't know. 10:40. Oh, sweet. Okay, excellent. So I don't know if you have any question regarding this overview of the model of like or later schedule of the week. Yep. Sure.
A Google Drive or a shared video.
Sure.
We can download the presentation and then show it.
Sure. Excellent. Did you have one? Attends, sorry. So the question was like to share it, to share the document on a Google Drive, and that will be done. And the next question, you're just here. So.
Okay. Thank you for presentation. That is the normal distribution is used to variable density pop is true. The normal distribution.
So is the question? You're talking about the log normal distribution?
Yes.
And you're asking if it's the truth distribution in terms of like, so the idea of the log normal, and I'm going to try to answer something, you tell me if it's answering, and then we can have a discussion. So,
This slide.
Yeah. So is your question why we use a log normal?
Yes.
Kind of. So the idea is that if you, so you tend to use a log normal distribution when the phenomenon is positive. So in that case, so a normal distribution, you know that it's like, it's not bounded at 0. So you can have negative value. And that's something that actually we might see in the tutorials. We might want to fit a normal and see what's the problem with fitting a normal. If you fit a normal, then you can actually predict population density that is negative. And that's the approach of the Bayesian statistics. You're trying to just like actually define what is your modeling framework. And here, population density can't be 0. Normal, it's not possible. You can't use a normal. So what can you use then? Then there is different, and that's one of the issues with Bayesian statistics, but it's also like the perks of working with Bayesian statistics. You need to know your statistical distribution. The distribution that can explain your phenomenon. And so a distribution that is for continuous variable and for positive variable, it could be the log normal. It can be also a Cauchy. No, not a Cauchy. It could be we discussed a gamma distribution. And then you go into the details of it. The problem with the gamma distribution is that the parameters are not really explainable. The log normal, you understand it, it's like a normal, just a log version of it, such that you understand that it's a mean. If you look into the details, it's slightly different than that, but it's similar to like a mean and a variation around. I was not expecting to do the variation, but yeah. So you have the mean, and you can directly understand and model the mean that are around the regression and the standard deviation around the regression. The question, but sometimes, typically, we were discussing that the other day, if you want to model 0 population, if you want to integrate that, log normal can't do it, because log normal at 0, it's infinity. So this is the kind of like question that you have to ask to prepare the model. Like, what do you want to yeah, you have to understand well your distribution in order to see what's the one that's the best fit for the data. Something that I want to add at this point is that the perks of like understanding Bayesian statistics is that when you read a model, you read all the assumptions of the model at the same time. And that's excellent. Like, because I'm coming from a frequentist approach, and you just run something and you're like, yeah, like the assumption is buried a bit behind the model. Whereas when you read a model that is Bayesian, you see exactly what the modeler wanted to add to the model, why they chose that. You see, but okay, I keep the enthusiasm low because we're going to talk about Bayesian statistics like in like tomorrow and after tomorrow. So. No, not a question from him.
I just want to add.
Wait. Yeah. Thank you. And maybe you want to.
I just wanted to add quickly for everybody. Would it be helpful for us to go through a range of different statistical distributions, so we can kind of talk through when a log normal would be appropriate versus a normal versus Poisson, binomial. We can take some time and maybe write on the whiteboard some common probability distributions to help give you those tools for making these decisions that Edith is describing. And we can also follow up with some other resources. There are some good books, and there's an appendix to a book by Andrew Gelman that has a very good summary of different probability distributions. And so I can get a PDF of that, and we'd be happy to share that so you can look at the characteristics of each distribution to help make these decisions.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point. The fact that, so every of your question, we're going to integrate it. So the workshop has an outline currently, but we really, the best use of the time that we have together, and it's really precious that we are together in a room. So the best way that we can use it is that by just reacting to your question, and we're going to integrate it. So typically this session, we haven't thought about it, would be great to integrate. We're going to have it on Wednesday. So that's the idea, like just to Wednesday, because starting from Wednesday is going to be more about statistics and implementing. So really don't hesitate to just, sorry for the online participant, but for the people in the room, like the question is going to help us to make a more targeted workshop. And and we are actually here to learn as well. So it's not like a straightforward capacity strengthening. We're coming with a toolbox and you use it. It's more like discussing the challenges and how we can together solve it. And I think that's part of also the hub that we were discussing. So this is not a one shot. It's like we're going to continue the conversation on how to improve those population models. So yeah, every comment or question is really like welcomed. That's sweet.
Sure. Grab this microphone again. Okay, so we have some questions in the chat online.
I think it's fine.
So one question for you, Edith, from Asnakech is, how can we aggregate village cluster into national, like urban and rural clusters? So how do we incorporate these different types of clusters into the national level model?
Okay, sweet. I'm gonna. Oh, see. So I'm gonna use one slide to enter. Oh, I'm gonna stay on that slide, by the way. So the idea of the hierarchical. So we want to model. I'm gonna repeat: global variation by region, by sub-region, by settlement type, and local variation. We talked about school density or different covariates that explain like local variation of population density. In order to model the global variation, every cluster is going to belong to a global group. So typically, like a cluster is going to be urban or rural. A cluster is going to belong to department 1 or department 2. So the information is embedded into the cluster. And how do we make it into the model is by this guy that is similar to a random effect model, a random effect term. So how do you understand the modeling of this mean of the population density? This model is telling you that if you're going to estimate this, if there was no covariates, is the mean population density per settlement type, per region, per state. So typically, if you're in Bogota, I know that the department is Bogota. So if your cluster is in Bogota, you're going to have, and Bogota is maybe not a good example because it's only urban, but can you give me like a department that have an urban center and a rural area? Yeah, okay. So Bojaca? Bojaca. So we have Bojaca department. Bojaca department is pretty big, and you have one city. I know that it's not true. You have one city that is Villa de Leia, and you have then a rural area around it. And you're going to have samples of population. In Bojaca, you're going to have some that are in Villa de Leia, and some that are going to be in the rural area. And so what you're going to say is that Boyaca, as a whole, can have similar density population compared to a department that is in the Pacific, that have different logic of urban settlements. But in Boyaca itself, you're going to have differences between the urban area of Bojaca and the rural area of Bojaca. So you're going to have these alpha terms that's going to be per settlement type and per region, such that the cluster that are part of it is going to share the same, it's not a slope, it's intercept term here, such that they're deemed as being similar. Such that if you are predicting an area in an area that is in Bojaca and in a rural area where you don't have sample, you're going to say basically in the rural area of Bojaca, it's going to look similar as the sample that are in the rural area of Bojaca. And that's where it's going into this alpha here. What I try to also mention with this slide is that it's not only the mean density of people, so the number of people, the mean density of the mean number of people per settled area. It could be also you can also add this global variation around the variance. And in order to have more precise estimates in the area of where you have less heterogeneity. So you can say that the variance sum is different if you are in a rural area than if you're in an urban area. But you can say also that the beta is different. And that's like similar to like a regression model. The fact that like the covariates might have an effect difference if you're in an urban setting or in a rural setting. Typically, and we observe that the road density in a rural area can be linked with more people, but in an urban area it can be with less people, because people don't like, often if it's like a big highway, there might be shops but it depends on the setting of the city. But sometimes the more people are not living close to the road, but like the main road, but more like, because it's going to be more like, typically if you take the Darin example, you have this big road here, but here it's mainly administrative building around the big road. So it's not the big road that's going to explain you where the people are. But in a rural setting, it's likely that the most like if you go into really rural area, it's going to be less people, and if you're around the main road, it's going to be more people. So those differences that are generic per groups, per settlement type, per region, are going into the alpha. Can go. You don't need to, but you can model it with alpha, beta, and the sigma in this kind of model. Is there another question?
There are several questions online, but does anyone in the room have a question before we move to another question online? No? Okay. Okay, so we have another question online, and Edith, let me know if you want me to respond to some of these. This one is from Arturo, who's asking, what is the recommended number of variables for rural locations? So I think this gets into how do we assess the fit of a model to select the number of variables that's adequate.
Do you think it's covariates, or is it the number of cluster? That's the question about.
I think
covariates.
Covariates is the question.
I mean, yeah, exactly. So there is not like a given number, and this is about like replicating the model with different setting, and then you do model validation, and we're going to go through model validation together. And it's going to be, I mean, if you've done the model validation is basically you compare the prediction with the true value, and you see if it fits, and if it doesn't fit, you need to think differently about the covariates or the model itself.
Yeah, and this is also linked to Tirtha's question, which is, what are the criteria for selecting covariates in the model? And so I would just add that the short answer is the way that we tend to assess model fit, both for selecting which covariates need to be in the model and to understand when we have a model fit that's adequate, is using out-of-sample cross-validation. So this means that we've collected data from a set of locations. We're going to take some of those data and hold them out of the model, fit the model to the rest, and then see how well we can predict those values. And then we do that repeatedly, holding out different subsets of the data that we have. And so this is the approach that we tend to use for model selection, but it's not the only approach. I mean, there's also information theoretics using AIC or BIC to compare models. And so there's a bunch of ways to do this, but we tend to use out-of-sample cross-validation for comparing models and understanding when we have adequate model fit. So I think that answers kind of two of the questions online at once. And then there's one more question from Andres, who's asking, how can we define properly the priors?
Oof. Someone has already done Bayesian here. So yeah, that's not the topic for right now because we just touch upon the logic of the modeling. The priors is a discussion that we're going to start tomorrow, but for the online participant, I don't know what's the best because, so this is touched upon in the tutorial, but this is the discussion that we're going to have from Wednesday, Thursday. So I'm super sorry, Andres.
I might jump in and, give a short answer. So first of all, just in the room, I would ask online, but I can't see a show of hands. So in the room, who do you understand, have you heard this concept of a prior in Bayesian statistics? So this is compared to a likelihood-based approach or a frequentist approach. Priors are an additional piece of information that we provide about the distribution of the parameters that are in the model. So like the slope, the intercept, we're providing the model with some information about that distribution, the likely values. Then we're combining that with data, the observations on the outcome that help us fit those parameter distributions. So in Bayesian statistics, this is a very common question about how do we define these priors so that they're not overwhelming the information we have from data. We don't want to change the results that we would get from the observed data. We want to really trust the data. And so the answer to the question online, I think the short answer is we want to start by defining priors that are very uninformative, so very wide. We want to say that the intercept term for the model could be any value that is reasonable. You know, that's possible with some just basic naive assumptions about the process we're modeling. If we have previous studies that give us more information, we might want to constrain those priors even more. And this becomes really important in cases where you don't have a lot of data to inform a specific parameter. So in those cases, you might want to provide informative priors based on previous studies and previous knowledge. But in general, in Bayesian statistics, we're trying to start from relatively uninformative priors that are wide distributions that allow that parameter to be any reasonable value. But we don't want it so wide that it includes values that are completely crazy and unreasonable. We want to make it a wide range of reasonable values.
And for the people that didn't understand this answer because of prior, tomorrow last session is really like a soft intro, like a hand-based introduction about what is a prior. And yeah, I didn't put too much emphasis on the fact that Bayesian is also about incorporating knowledge about the processes in general that is not data, but understanding about the fact that the population density can't be 1 million people per hectare. It's not possible. So you want to integrate that in the model. And we'll have a soft introduction to priors at the end of tomorrow. So that's going to be also for the online people and for people here.
Okay, so it's time for our break. And so we have coffee in the hallway. So there's a couple more questions online. So if it's okay with everybody in the room, do you mind if I give a quick answer to these couple of questions online and then we'll take a break and grab coffee? Is this okay? So the two questions that we have online, are both very interesting and good questions. So the first one is, how can we incorporate AI, artificial intelligence, or machine learning models into this type of a population estimation process? Do you want to answer, or would you?
I have an answer. You on it.
So my short answer would be that it would be really great to collaborate and compare machine learning approaches versus statistical approaches. Machine learning are really fantastic if you have lots of predictor variables and you want to just put them into the model and get good predictions. Statistics is great if you want to model the actual process. You want to control the structure of the model to represent the process, in our case, the distribution of people on the landscape, and uncertainty. So for us, working with national statistics offices on official statistics, it's really important for us to quantify uncertainty in a reliable way, and statistics is very great at this. And with machine learning, it can be a bit more difficult, although not impossible. So these are the trade-offs. And while we're pursuing a statistical approach, it would be great to collaborate with you and other people who are pursuing a machine learning approach to compare and see how we can manage those trade-offs.
And just to add, the settlement maps that I'm talking about, it's machine learning. So we can also use input that are produced by machine learning into the model. So it's also, the model itself, our thinking currently is that it's because of the problem of the data, because of the fact that it's a sample, because of the uncertainty, we think that is way better tackled by a statistical process that adds information from the thinking of a human rather than just the data itself, because the data is biased. So our thought is that to compensate the bias, you need a structure. That's a bit the idea. But obviously, any input could be machine learning as well. And everything that is derived from remote sensing can be processed through machine learning. So there's also collaboration in one.
Okay, and then the last question from Walter is a great question to end on, I think, because it's a forward-looking question. The question is there a way of including seasonal mobility other than migration, which from a local perspective might be more useful? Because migration is usually referring to longer timescales, so like 5-year timescales. And so my answer to this question is yes, there's absolutely modeling approaches that I think we can link to this that incorporate migration, including seasonal migration, or forced displacement from conflict events or natural disasters. But this is not the approach that we're going to be focusing on this week. So this week, we're focused on an approach looking at a snapshot in time, like the year of the census, and trying to fill gaps spatially. We're not, in this model, looking at migration through time, although I think there are exciting opportunities for us to pursue similar approaches, Bayesian approaches with geospatial covariates, to tackle those types of problems. But that's not the focus of what we'll be looking at this week. This week is one snapshot in time, and we're focused on spatial variation rather than temporal variation. So with that, we have some coffee in the hallway. And for those online, we'll be back in the schedule. What's the time for the next one to start?
Was it 11?
Okay, so it's a bit past 11. So we'll be back, for those online, we'll be back in maybe 10, 15 minutes. Okay, thank you all.
¿Puedo continuar o empezar de nuevo?
You wanna empezar más?
Sorry, I've just discovered the microphone was off. Sorry, I'll start again. The idea of the presentation is to show how valuable model population estimates can be for census and countries and national statistical offices. A population housing census is among the most complex and massive exercises taken in peacetime by nations. In most low and mid-income countries, the population and housing census is the primary source of data on the number of people, their spatial distribution, age and sex structure, living conditions, key socioeconomic characteristics. It further provides a comprehensive picture of housing and conditions in the country. Census data are critical for good governance, development, risk reduction, crisis response, social welfare programs, business markets. However, a census remains a logistically expensive, challenging exercise, and it is ideally conducted once a decade. Everybody here knows how difficult it is to take an operation like a census. National statistical offices often face obstacles that can impact the successful implementation, data quality, and the overall completion of a national population census. Innovative statistical approaches are being developed and evaluated to support and potentially improve census planning, implementation. Model population estimates and their small area estimates of population hold the potential to support census planning and improve quality. Statistical modeling approaches to estimate populations are developed based on correlation between population density, geospatial covariate data layers. These correlative relationships can be leveraged into statistical model to predict population density with certain levels of uncertainty, depending on the initial output data. These models offer the advantage of relatively low cost and may provide alternative ways of deriving more recent estimates to inform census planning and implementation. The virtue of being probabilistic, model-based estimates should not be treated in the same way as true population counts, but more as an opportunity to refine planning when most recent censuses are largely outdated. Concretely, estimates rely on existing or specifically implemented sample household surveys, such as those produced in undertaking household enumerations for surveys. These samples are combined with geospatial covariate data layers to form the basis of the statistical model. Once the model has been produced, other independent sources, such as household surveys, can be used to rely newly modeled population estimates. Population is modeled as a function of satellite imagery-based or geospatially derived covariate layers, such as distance to roads, nighttime lights, intensity, or land cover classification. Often, the best predictors of population density are the presence, densities, and patterns of built structures. Assuming that population are mostly located in settled areas, we can estimate population of a country by combining the population densities with maps of settled areas. This requires that settlement mapping is undertaken, most often using recent, very high resolution satellite imagery. Model can then predict population densities of people per unit area for any area unit, such as administrative areas or census enumeration areas, or even grids of 100 meters by 100 meters. Model-based approaches produces gridded population estimates with full national coverage. As such, the application of these estimates might be useful at different steps the census process. Further, high-resolution gridded population estimates are produced. They offer the flexibility to aggregate grid cells to estimate population totals for any area, administrative units, health catchment, school catchment. That is invaluable for survey planning, humanitarian response, development planning. Although the population estimation methods are tailored to characteristics and data availability of the specific country, they have two broad categories, top-down and bottom-up methods. Population and housing census are the most important resource to produce accurate population data at the national and subnational level. These are typically undertaken every decade, and simple projections can be used to create subnational estimates in the intervening years. These data are typically only available as counts per administrative unit, masking small area variation and making them difficult to integrate with other data sets. Top-down modeling methods take a global database of administrative units-based census and projections count for each year from 2000 to 2020 and utilize a set of detailed geographic data sets to disaggregate them to counts for each 100 by 100 meters. Among the advantages of the top-down methods are they are consistent and complete estimates for the year 2000 for 2020 for every country, including breakdowns by age, and it maintains official population estimates or census counts at the administrative unit level, as well as adjustments available to match UN national estimates. Among the disadvantages, for countries that have not had a census for a long time and where significant subnational variation, migration, fertility, and mortality exist, the input official population counts and projection based on them can be highly uncertain. Where little recent population enumeration data exists for a country and timely estimates that account for recent demographic changes are required, bottom-up approach is likely to provide more accurate estimates. Here, simple data from as many trustworthy and recent survey data sets as possible are used with detailed geospatial data sets to build a statistical model to estimate population numbers by age and sex in unsampled locations, together with the measurement of uncertainty. This approach can also be used to fill gaps where field enumeration is not possible due to conflict, poor, or financial limitations. Among the advantages in the bottom-up approach, more accurate outputs than top-down approaches, where census data are outdated and census projections are highly uncertain. Measurement and mapping of uncertainty highlights where caution is used, where caution is needed in using the data. Where caution in using the data should be exercised and where further data collection could be prioritized. Among the disadvantages, there are tailored modeling to country of interest takes effort and often engagement with governments, which can be slow. Typically, estimates are tied to a single year. Among the outputs, we will have population counts at the desired unit area. It could be enumeration area, any administrative area. 100 meters by 100 meters gridded population estimates. Population estimates disaggregated by sex and age, potentially other characteristics depending on the quality of the data. Doug and Edith can correct me later if I'm mistaken. We can generate confidence intervals for model estimates. Here, one example of gridded population estimates. It's a bit gutted, but we can see the darker areas are more densely populated, and the lighter colored are less densely populated. When we move to the uncertainty, it looks like it's the opposite. The areas where we had less densely populated have higher uncertainty of the population estimates. Here, another example. The word pop page they did with population estimates, you can select, you can draw a polygon, and then you can see the estimated population in the drawn area with the confidence intervals, as well as age and sex age distribution. How valuable it is for census? We have prediction of population counts by sex and age in uncovered areas. It could inform census mapping, population estimates for countries where census enumeration is not possible, where parts of the country are not reachable for enumeration due to insecurity or inaccessibility, to estimate the extent of census under coverage, to estimate population distribution in the intercensal period. Results are important for updating national sampling frames. Regarding reliability, model estimates contain uncertainty, which can result in order of magnitude confidence intervals around the predicted population density. To date, there is no mechanism for deciding the level of uncertainty or whether it should be included in the decision-making. Yet, even population estimates are subject to imprecisions, they might serve as input for census planning and census cartography, substitute to enumeration in inaccessible areas, input data to update master sampling frame, evaluating census coverage, anonymizing census results, integrating population and housing census with agricultural census. Using models for input planning and cartography. The planning process for census and cartography fieldwork fundamentally relies on population projections or forecasts by region, district, municipality, village, and enumeration area. These populations counts inform resource allocation for the implementation of the census, including funds, allocated time, and individual census stages, personnel, and operations. However, official populations projections produced right after the census may become increasingly outdated over time. If not continuously updated, and if not continuously updated with more recent intercensal surveys. Further, while population projections can be accurate at the national and regional levels, they may be inaccurate at lower levels, especially in enumeration areas, as model population estimates are based on the most recent geospatial cover rates available. They often provide a more accurate estimate at district, village, and enumeration areas level. Model population estimates in combination with road, river, and network geospatial data can be used to plan the most efficient routes of cartographers. More efficient field work can reduce overall costs and the amount of time required to complete cartography. Due to the immense financial costs of a census, it is critical that potential opportunities for saving are considered. The costs of saving can be derived from the amount of time that is needed for a cartographer or enumerator to complete their field work,
by more efficient routing, more accurate planning, in how many cartographers are needed for each enumeration area. Further, satellite imagery-based settlement mapping improves the planning and updating of cartography, as it can identify small settlements that are previously not shown on maps. Also, model population estimates together with road networks can be used to derive new enumeration areas. How to get provisional figures of population of enumeration areas or supervision zones and administrative units. In the traditional approach, previous census serves as basis of the provisional population figures for enumeration areas, supervision zones, and administrative units. Among the challenges, the decennial character of the census. Previous census is outdated. One solution could be the consideration of the demographic change since last census. Generally, one applies the country demographic growth rate, but this rate generally doesn't or poorly include internal migration, especially at the local level. At local level, we have areas that may be more attractive or more received to population that migrates. The model population estimates can serve as provisional figures of population of enumeration areas and other administrative units. Model population estimates are based on the most recent satellite imagery and geospatial covariates. Satellite imagery identifies new settlements and build-up areas, also abandoned places. Based on imagery, building footprints and settlements extend and new built-in areas can be extracted. These new data, reflecting the current state of population locations, are then combined with a microcensus with previous census data to provide up-to-the-date estimates populations of enumeration areas, supervision zones, or the administrative units. Here we see an example of the gridded population used to converted to the household numbers in cartography planning. This is from Lusaka in Zambia, if I'm not mistaken. These are the counts of households in each grid. And here the estimating households number was used to identify the number of households at enumeration areas using the gridded population estimates. Using zonal statistics, household estimates are extracted from gridded population at enumeration area level. The Lusaka example we're seeing here. Model population estimates can also be used assessing census under coverage. The example of the 5th census in Burkina Faso. Conducting a census sometimes faces security access challenges in certain parts of the territory, with no possibility to send enumerators there. Modeling approaches built using the data that was collected can be used to produce estimates for areas where enumeration was not possible. The accuracy of the estimates will depend upon the quality of the enumeration in accessible areas, the intrinsic performance of the model, and the likelihood of the model assumptions. In Burkina Faso, this is the example of areas that were totally or partially not covered, municipalities totally or partially not covered in their 50 census. The process of imputation of the population for not covered or partially not covered municipalities was developed as. First, the model was developed for the overall country. Then accuracy of the model was assessed to make sure it performs for the overall country. And then we have to derive the estimation for not or partially covered municipalities, which are then considered as the population of these municipalities. It can also be used as input to master sampling frame. Once census data are validated, a master sample of enumeration areas is generally drawn from a census database. The sample is used during the intercensus period to conduct major socioeconomic and demographic surveys of the country. The parameters of the master sample tend to deviate from that of the population over time, due to population growth and change and its spatial changes in its spatial distribution. Depending on the type of the cartography from which initial census sample was drawn, graded population estimates can be used to update the master sampling in two ways. If cartography was digital, one can update the master sampling frame by updating population of the enumeration areas to gridded estimates. If cartography was not digital, updating populations of the enumeration areas to gridded estimates cannot be applied since enumeration areas boundaries would not be in the numerical format, and it would be not possible to overlay gridded population layers to the enumeration areas layers. In this situation, we would be able to advise drawing a new master sample from gridded population, considering each grid or group of contiguous grids as primarily sampling units. This second strategy is an improvement of the well-known area sampling, since in this case, we have a more accurate estimate of the population in the area. I've studied it, that's why I'm evaluating census coverage. Generally, after enumeration phase, census coverage is usually assessed through different methods and data sources: demographic projections, civil registration data, health data, education data, which might include the implementation of a post-enumeration survey. With geospatial population estimates, we have at our disposal an additional source of comparison for geospatial population estimates to serve as a source for census coverage assessment. The estimation should be conducted using data from enumeration areas with perfect coverage and good data quality. Once again, geospatial estimates should be considered only if model performance is high and the underlying assumptions are realistic. Census is supposed to count everybody, but for some reasons, it happens that some households are not covered. If the reasons of non-coverage is related to accessibility, then areas, localities that are not reached are known and methods explained previously can be applied. But sometimes some households or areas are omitted during the enumeration just because the job is not well done. Generally, census coverage is assessed through post-enumeration survey, but a post-enumeration survey is far from being The cost is far from being negligible. It's time-consuming for National Statistics Office, while in the meantime, they need to work on census data. Even if the post-enumeration survey is done, it is important to mobilize other resources of data to triangulate. In this perspective, population estimates can help. Preliminary steps. Start by overlaying GPS coordinates and households and current recent satellite imageries to identify undercounted areas. Exclude all enumeration areas that were not fully enumerated, belonging to the undercounted areas. Make sure that the remaining enumeration areas are statistically representative in each strata, region, place of residence. Once a statistically representative subset of fully enumerated areas is selected, perform the modeling on the subset of the selected enumeration areas. Make sure estimates are robust, especially in terms of precision, have a narrow confidence interval, and accuracy. The predictions reflect the real world when predictions are compared to observed data. Then compare the estimated population confidence intervals to the population observed in any given administrative level and identity. The use for anonymizing census results. Statistical methods can be used to anonymize census data set. Individual observations can be aggregated to gridded high-resolution population totals using GIS softwares and statistical methods. With such methods, the observations, administrative totals by 100 meters by 100 meters resolution, and thus create an anonymous data layer usable for government, for decision-making, for survey planning, and for the general public to use it if publicly released. Model population estimates are typically produced at the scale of small grid squares, a format that is particularly useful as they provide decision makers and data users with the flexibility to aggregate population estimates into different spatial units. They can be aggregated over various levels of administrative units, but also over aerial units that don't follow administrative boundaries, such as hospital catchment area. This enables integration and analysis of a range of other spatial data sets that are not possible using standard census counts mapped to administrative boundaries. The model datasets do not, however, replace the need for a full census, which usually includes a more precise and more comprehensive collection of demographic and socioeconomics, as well as population and health. In absence of census, it could also be used. When recent censuses are not available, to compile population housing-related data sources available at subnational level, surveys, census population counts at the lowest geographical level available, households listing data sets, and run the best possible population projections at subnational level with resources available, migration data, vital statistics, to better calibrate the population trends. In Haiti, given the general lack of data, at subnational level available, especially data from household listing run, in Haiti, given the lack of general subnational data available, it was decided to run the model in two independent phases. First, to generate population projections at subnational level using the best and most reliable methodology available. Constant share for population estimates mixed with weighted growth rate to generate population by sex and age group. Use spatial data from recent but incomplete household listing, building footprints, and other ancient data that would help us distribute those estimated population counts across the administrative units. In the case of Haiti, recent household listing was available but did not cover the entire country. Hybrid spatial modeling combining filling the household listing gaps with building footprints. It was necessary to cross-check the model. It is necessary to cross-check the model with recent listings from other data collection activities to ground truth model estimates. Thank you. For those interested in taking those efforts, a first step would be to establish project goals, input data, modeling strategies, and funding. To assess the investment needed to assist generated model population estimates, an assessment of the national capacity within the National Statistics Offices is important. UNFPA can support resource mobilization. Financial resources will be needed to enlist the support of specialized researchers from specialized researchers. Thank you everyone for your time.
Thanks a lot. And I think that, oh, you have a question maybe?
Yes, I have 3 questions.
So one sec.
One from myself and another from David Sanchez from the National Statistics Office in Ecuador. So David is asking us, what is the experience of National Statistics Office in implementation of a national statistic graded, a national statistic graded? I don't know what he means, like Grilla Nacional de Estadística, in implementation of a Grilla Nacional de Estadística, is the first question. And what discussions the National Statistics Office have about the modificable area unit program and how this affects the use of the statistics, official statistics for the application of public policy. I don't know if it's clear. It's not that very clear for me, but if you want, we can also ask for more details to David. And I have another question from myself, and it's, what do we do if we have data of satellite imagery from different years? Because how do we account for that program? Because in Ecuador, we have most recent data just for the urban areas, but we have satellite imagery from, I don't know, 2018 and 2017 from the other areas. So I think that we should take into account that in the model and do something about that, right? So how do we take into account the year?
I guess you would probably be more suited for answering these questions.
I'm just sorry because I was dealing, so I missed the first question.
It's about a national statistic, right? Grilla Nacional, sorry.
Like, so.
I don't know if you want to talk about a little bit.
Yeah, of course. Right now we are researching on implementing a grid in Colombia, but it's preliminary research about how to choose build or generate a new grid for Colombia. But currently we don't have a grid, a national grid implemented by DANE, but other entities such as Address for All, OpenStreetMap, entities like that, like those, are implementing their own grids for Colombia and also for other countries. So that's the answer.
Thank you, Gustavo.
And I think I can spend slightly, I don't know, I'm just looking what you have. I think I'm going to use this one. So maybe we didn't introduce so much the grid for population estimates, and it's not necessarily the focus of this week, but for people that are not familiar with the notion of a grid for population, what you're seeing here, actually, it's a grid. It's by, I think you don't have a closer one, a zoom. But like these are pixels with number of people per pixel. Oh yeah, cool. So this is a zoom kind of what we've seen before. And here you have the number of people per pixel. So why we want a grid? There's several reasons. So sometimes, and you touched upon the fact that a grid is used to anonymize because you have points data and you want to aggregate at the grid cell such that you anonymize. And the other way, in some situation, is the opposite. You have totals of people in an area and you want to disaggregate at the pixel level. Why you want to disaggregate at the pixel level? I'm switching grid cell, pixel is the same word. It's just the fact that you're predicting at the grid, like the little grid cell, the square. Why you want to do that? And this is a good example. So you see that if you take typically this polygon here, normally official statistics are disseminated or released for this kind of area. But the fact is that you can clearly see that there is an unequal distribution of people between here and here. So almost all people of this polygon are living in this area. And having this grid cell allows to do more analysis around the population. Typically, you want to build an hospital. The hospital, like clearly you need to put it here. But the population number that you have, if you look at only those polygons, you don't, like, it's not clear where is actually located the people inside inside those areas. So therefore, some statistics office are looking. So I know for the French one, they have a master. So they have a grid that is 200 meters. I think you have some, at least for the census, DANE released a grid at 2 kilometers. It's on the website. Okay, maybe I'm.
No, for the census, for the population census of 2018, we didn't have a grid. The implementation of a grid is a recent project that we are developing right now.
And do you know which meter you probably going to use? The size of the grid cell?
Yeah, we're trying to implement at least 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid, but the idea is to go down to 100 meter by 100 meter grid to have a grid for estimations, for population estimation and other variable estimation.
Yeah, actually, it's good that you mentioned. It's good that Gustavo is mentioning also the fact that we're talking about population here, but you could have also other indicators that are presented in grid. Typically, the number of people that don't have access to certain basic services. And if you have that, you can better plan where you're going to put those basic services. Why we're talking about this grid in this context? So it's also the fact that so the population model that we're going to discuss all along the week, you can predict. The question is where, at which level you want to predict. So in certain situation, you want to predict at enumeration area level. So you're going to predict if you don't have the number of people here, you're going to predict at this level. In some situation, typically the one in Burkina Faso or in Sub-Saharan Africa, they don't have such a sampling frame with little census units. So what we did, because they don't have the census unit to predict the number of people, and you need a unit to predict the number of people, we predicted at the grid cell. So it's a way to have a unit for which to predict the number of people. I hope that answering the global question about yeah, no, so that was the first question. The second question was like the MOPE, the motive. So they were talking about the fact the MOPE is an issue that you encounter in spatial statistics. The fact that the total, typically, if you have two spatial units with a high value of people and a low value of people, if you sum them up for the entire area, you don't have a clear vision of what's happening, because it's like the dynamic is different at the aggregated level than at the local level. And for that reason, we would say just predict at the lowest level, and then you can always aggregate to the analysis later. But like, yeah, predicting at the lowest level is the answer, with some trade-off, because how accurate it is at the local level, the very local level, yeah, you have to think it's true. The third question about satellite imagery, that's someone that is used to satellite imagery, because when you look at any satellite imagery, let's take this one. Let's look at what's behind it. Behind it is satellite image. You have the feeling that it's one image, but it's made of a lot of different images that might have been taken at different time of the year. And why that is because of cloud cover. If you have a cloud, then you can't take this one, you have to wait for the next one or the previous one. It could be like for sometimes a defect in the satellite, in the satellite itself. Sometimes it's just the fact that the satellite did that during a year, but didn't cover the entire country, so you have to collect it from another year. So actually, when you're working with satellite imagery, it's working with a mosaic. So a mosaic of different images, date. And then you have to assess. The question is, like typically, so you raised this question because you had more recent images in the urban area and outdated, maybe, in the rural area. First, how outdated it is. Because if the population dynamics is slow, maybe in an image from 5 years ago, it's still good, actually. Or maybe it doesn't account a shed that has been constructed, but this is not going to affect population numbers so much. So first, the question is it a problem? If you think it's a problem, because then this is what gets into the modeling issue. And so you can tackle it. One of the issues that we have, and was pretty tricky to get out of it, is to predict population in Papua New Guinea, because it's not even an issue of like the year, is that some buildings are not even detected under the tree canopy. And so the methods here, you will see it's really based on the settlement, the buildings. So what you can do is that you're using other covariates to predict the building. And those other covariates might be more like recent or like complete, or go into the depth, such that actually what you do, you predict buildings to predict population. But this adds more uncertainty, but it's like You might need it in some circumstances. But then that's where you can explore the model and just like stretch it to address more challenges. Yeah.
Sorry, I have another question.
One second. Okay.
Pedro, you talked about anonymization of census data, and the question is, at the individual level, apart from the data of names and the national ID, what variable do you think that is important to drop from the database in order to make the database anonymous at the individual level? And at the geographical level, what is the smallest area that you think that is suitable to present the data in order to consider the database anonymous? Because, for example, if you show the database at the smallest level, like the block level, you can easily identify houses and buildings. So what is the best level to present the data at the anonymous with what are the variables, and at the geographical, which is the smallest level?
I'll answer first and I'll ask for help later. But I would answer that at first, sex and age only. Maybe it's only sex, or only it's a person. Because it might be risky depending on the size of the grid. If you select a small grid, you have 3 persons living there, it's easy to identify all of them. This effort needs to be made very carefully, and so we can trust that we anonymized the information in fact. So I don't think there's a rule that it's applied for all areas, all countries, but it's important to be very careful in this process. Edith would like to add something.
Yeah, I think it's a good question because so typically I can answer with something else, so the question is also how model it is. So in the question of the population model, I think this is not related so much because you're predicting, but you're not actually aggregating individual data. So you have the uncertainty, so you have an indication of the number of people, but it's not like records, so it's a model. So you protect in a way this, it's not confidential data. There is, so we're working as well with Dane and the Center for the Leverhulme Center for Demographic on using administrative records. And the way to not go into the confidential issue is that we're going to work at the municipality level, but then disaggregate, but still modeling it at the lower level, such that it's not actually proper people that you are aggregating. It's still a model. So you're being protected by the model itself. But it's a greater question. The fact is that from satellite imagery, you have the number, the buildings. So the confidentiality is already broken by the satellite imagery that's going to give you like the buildings. So I think it's like a wider conversation that has to happen. And I know that this is Dane, you have some thought about it to protect the confidentiality.
To anonymize the data, what we do is to identify the variables, the sensible variables. For instance, we have ethnicity. We aggregate, if you see the data that is open access, the census that is open access, the age is 5 years group age. You have, for instance, for migrants, you cannot find the information from migrants in that data. As well, you cannot find disability, because disabled people are easy to identify. And also very old people, like they are
few cases, so we try to aggregate them in order to anonymize them. Also, but geographically, what we do, if there is, for instance, a block with 2 people, another block with 3 people, we try to combine those blocks so people cannot identify them. That's what we do.
I would just complement with the example from Brazil. It was not exactly with the modeling, but previously Brazil has a project to produce grid information from the population. So he did this and published in 2016. The total that was published was the total population, open by sex, but the criteria that they used to publish and not identify, because we work there with the enumeration areas, like the census blocks. So these information are available for everyone, but when we're working with the grid, you're gonna have more sensible data. So what we did is actually to produce, like Lina said, we grouped by, so the control was actually the size of the grid. So for the rural areas, we use 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, and then in the urban areas, we use 200 meters. So the criteria was the size of the grid.
There is a question online on the use of the post-enumeration survey using satellite imageries. So maybe, do you want to come back to the link between post-enumeration survey and satellite imagery-based model?
I guess I didn't understand. Yes, I probably when I was talking about post-enumeration survey, I was mentioning that as another way of measuring census coverage, not as another use for the model of populations. I probably didn't make myself clear at the time, but post-enumeration survey is another kind of strategy to identify census coverage. Can you add on that?
Yeah, I think that's around validating the census. Caio's presentation might be the most appropriate, because that's when, so Caio, that's going to present this afternoon around IBGE, so the Brazilian Stats Office experience with the model. So it's not to replace the post-enumeration survey, but it's just to validate or control the ground information to see if they need to send another survey team to cover the area in kind of real time. I don't know if the end you managed to do that. Probably, maybe not. We'll see. But stay tuned for this afternoon, because that's going to be really around like how to integrate population model within a census preparation and validation.
Here is the question is from Angel here, but I'm gonna tell you in English. So one of the inputs of the model that we talked about was the lights, the image that we have from the lights. I think that from the satellite images, but we have in Ecuador a database of the electricity consumption. So can it be a good input for the model?
So this is an excellent question, and in Brazil they used it. So ANEL, it's called ANEL, and they used something similar, and they had an issue with it actually. So we're going to discuss that tomorrow. It's going to be about data, and so I'm going to present some things that have been used, but the idea is to open up such that you can also discuss the data that you have and how it can be used, such that we exchange around that. Are there other questions? Yeah. But you can do it in Spanish. Just slow.
Es muy importante la encuesta poscensal. En nuestro país se ha planificado una encuesta poscensal, pero por diferentes motivos, el operativo censal o de levantamiento de información en campo se aplazó de acuerdo a la planificación. Entonces la poscensal se fue posponiendo. ¿Cuán válido es la información de una poscensal cuando ya ha pasado mucho tiempo para el uso del modelo? Y sobre todo también pensando que no va a tener una buena desagregación, sino solamente nacional, urbano-rural máximo. Y nos preocupa más el tiempo transcurrido. Sabemos que DANE hizo su poscensal apoyándose de una encuesta dirigida de hogares. No tenemos detalles qué tiempo duró esa encuesta poscensal, cuánto fue el tiempo después de levantado el censo, por qué lo consideraron como válida esa opción para que sea considerado como poscensal, y si no, y si también lo utilizaron para aplicación del modelo.
I'm just going to start by saying that this model, the model that we're going to see, is not targeted at post-census enumeration. So that's how I'm going to start. Then for the question, so I don't know, at Darin, I'm sure that you have professional of the census omission. You said at the beginning, I don't know who worked on it. Okay, fair enough.
Okay, about the time, we did the potential survey, like almost 15 days. It started 15 days or a month after we finished the census. It was at the end of the year 2018. So we consider valid, and actually we estimated this census omission using several techniques. For instance, demographic techniques. So, and the results were very similar. So what I can tell you is that you should use one technique. So about that is time valid, and about geographic disaggregation. We, for instance, with the dual system method, we have very coherent results for the national level. But when we got down for the department level, we didn't have any, we didn't have good results. So for instance, I think these kind of surveys are very useful when you have all the country. But if you go down to a more disaggregated level, they are not going to be super useful, okay?
Is there other question? For sure.
Ok, voy a hablar un poco español, inglés. Okay, the question is, it can be used the register administrative, specifically in the Ecuador, we have the register administrative of the people with the cédula de identidad, okay. If this register administrative complement with the model of the census can be used, or is not adecuado?
So we see like a lot of interest from post-enumeration survey or like how to do the census submission. So okay, I have questions, but well, just one question. Do you collect the cedulas of the census people? You have it. Okay. Well, that's very interesting. So let's say that we're going to keep this question for later, because so the workshop and what we're going to disseminate online is really around leveraging satellite imagery. And the satellite imagery related to the census, I would say that the best use of it, we're going to see it with Lina's presentation. This is more in spatial, in area that has not been covered at all. So like you can't go there for infrastructure issues, like there's no routes, or like there's issues like conflict issues, or like these kind of questions can be answered by satellite imagery. The question, the census submission is broader question than like spatial coverage. You're not so the census submission is basically yeah. So for census submission people, wait for Lina. Yeah, and I'm wondering if we should not have a time in the workshop thinking about administrative records, but that we'll discuss later, I think. Okay, is there other question around population estimation from satellite imagery?
On this question of census omissions and post-enumeration surveys, one point I would just say is that while we're focused here on spatial inference, using geospatial data for areas that were uncovered, the Bayesian statistical approach in general, the idea for us focusing on Bayesian statistics and teaching you basic skills and software for Bayesian statistics is so that you can use that to start thinking about designing your own models in Bayesian statistics. So like Edith said, we're not focused here on census omissions in terms of having a census and a post-enumeration survey and then estimating omissions in that way. Bayesian statistics as a fundamental skill is still very powerful for developing models for this purpose. And so that's part of what we want you to take away from the workshop is the fundamental skills and knowledge of the software that's needed and the coding that's needed so that you can apply it to other challenges after the workshop, even though that's not our primary focus this week.
Lunch? Yes! So we're still on the 1 hour 30 lunch?
Yes, 1 hour and 30, I think.
So we come back at 2? At 2.